and Peter has unmuted himself. And welcome to everyone. I pass it over to Peter and will mute myself as well.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So let me share my Firefox instance. Hopefully you can see this. I guess you can yell if you can't see this. So we discussed last time about renaming the meeting, and by far the biggest option was computing. So we've gone ahead and renamed the group as the computing group. And so we do have a new email address, computing@u3acommunities.org. The other one will continue to work, but let's switch over to the new email address. So today we have two videos. I'll introduce them one at a time, but the first is about end-to-end encryption in messaging apps. And the second one is about VPN, virtual private networks. The next meeting, sticking to the third Tuesday of the month, is going to be on the 17th of October. And I've got a list here. So if anyone's got ideas, what you want to hear about or talk about or listen to someone else talk about, then do send an email into that address. And I'll put some examples there of things. It was just a bit of a brain dump, to be honest, of the sorts of things that I thought we could be talking about in the near future. I'll read through them, see if any of them take your fancy. Web-based office versus desktop office, home automation, personal security, firewalls and viruses and such like, cloud and virtual machines, social media issues, questions, blockchain, networking, Wi-Fi, broadband technology, etc. Generative AI, we've touched on that before, but there's always more to talk about that. So, just a request really, if you've got ideas that you'd like to talk about or listen about, drop an email and I'm sure we can get something together for it. Any questions before we launch into the videos that we're going to watch? You stick your hand up.
Peter?
Yes.
Yeah, just a quickie.
Yeah.
Are we going to do, it's like gadgets. If anybody's picked up an interesting gadget, can they bring it along or whatever?
And what sort of gadget do you want? I never want to exclude things. But at the same time, other groups do touch on other areas, of course. I participate in a technology group and, naturally, gadgets would belong to the technology group. But yeah, definitely, if you've got any ideas, then whiz them in. I'll gather the list of ideas together.
Sure. Yeah, it's just I picked up this, it's called an Aura frame, which it simply displays photographs, but I think it's a nifty piece of equipment. Right. I don't have any financial incentive, but yeah.
Okay. Anything else before we launch onto the first video? Okay, so I will introduce this. I am a bit of a fan of this guy, Tom Scott. He does seem to have a knack to explain things quite clearly. Definitely worth watching his videos. In this video, he talks about end-to-end encryption. And that is end-to-end encryption that's used by messaging apps, things like Signal, Skype, iMessage, WhatsApp, and so on and so forth. And those apps are encrypted end-to-end so that no one in the middle can intercept what you're messaging, well, mostly anyway. But what we see is governments around the world keep requesting that they can read these messages. And so Tom created this, I thought, quite interesting video about having backdoors for end-to-end encryption messaging apps. So I'm hoping this will trigger a good range of discussions. So let's fire it up.
WhatsApp to introduce a backdoor into their encryption so that the police and government can read your messages if they need to. As I record this, they haven't done it yet, but the laws that could let them do so in the future are already in place. And here's something you might not expect me to say. That sounds like a reasonable idea. After all, backdoors have been allowed for old school phone conversations for decades. They're called wiretaps. And if a criminal investigation has enough evidence that they can get a legal warrant, then they can look inside your postal mail, they can listen to your phone calls, and they can intercept your text messages. And it's called a wiretap because many years ago, the police would literally be attaching a device to a physical phone wire. So for anyone who grew up knowing that, anyone who grew up with computers like this, like pretty much every politician in government, well, it seems reasonable that should also extend to, for example, WhatsApp. So why not? Well, first, let's look at the technical detail. It all depends on who is holding the keys. Modern encryption uses complicated math that is easy for a computer to calculate one way, but almost impossible to work out in reverse. A really simple example, if I ask you to multiply two prime numbers together, like 13 times 17, you can do that by just hitting a few keys on a calculator. And because those were prime numbers, we know that's the only way to make 221 by multiplying two whole numbers together, other than 221 times 1, and that's not really helpful. But if I ask you what two prime numbers were multiplied together to make 161, there is no way to work that out quickly. There are a few shortcuts that you can take, but it's still basically a brute force method. Now imagine that you're not trying to work out 161, but instead something like this, and you start to see the scale of the problem. And that's just a simple example. Modern cryptography uses way more complicated one-way operations. The important part is that you can have a computer do math that's simple one way, but could take longer than the lifetime of the universe to brute force back. The result is that you can have two keys, two massive numbers, one public, one private. You send your public key out to the world. Anyone can encrypt a message with it. The message gets converted to what looks like random noise. Even that same public key can't convert it back. But you can take that noise and use your private key and only your private key to decrypt it. When you want to send a message back, you use their public key and they use their private key to decrypt it. And the beautiful part of this, there's no need to exchange keys in advance. You don't have to work out old school one-time pads or anything like that. You can post your public key out on the internet for all to see. And as long as you keep that private key secret, no one else can read your messages. This is a system that has been tested under incredibly harsh conditions for decades. It works. The catch is it's really unfriendly to use. It's difficult enough to get someone to join a new messaging service as it is, let alone bring their friends along. Now you have to generate these weird key things as well. And if you lose your phone or somehow forget that key or your hard drive crashes and you haven't got a backup, all your messages are gone, lost as random noise forever. Email that works this way has been around for decades, but it's too complicated and it's too unfriendly for most people. The security wasn't worth the effort. So instead, webmail services, along with Facebook, Twitter, and everyone else, didn't worry about that. Early on, they were mostly unencrypted, but rapidly realized that was a bad idea. So now they use regular web encryption, that padlock in your browser, to make sure that no one on your network can see your password or your messages while they're in transit. And that's the threat that most people have to be worried about. But they do have the content of those messages in plain text or something close to it. And those companies can give that back to you whenever you want, which means that when a government comes along with a legal warrant, the companies can also give you messages to them. But this was fine, right? This was reasonable. This was an acceptable compromise between security and usability. Or at least it was, until it was revealed that, in short, every major government was keeping a copy of pretty much everything everyone ever wrote, at which point a few companies decided that actually they really didn't want to take the risk of anyone, not even their own employees, being able to even theoretically access the messages that people were sending. The result is WhatsApp and iMessage and the many smaller apps like them. They have end-to-end encryption. Your phone generates a public and private key for you automatically. And it exchanges public keys behind the scenes while you're writing your first message to someone, and everything after that's encrypted. And it's all automatic. And so WhatsApp and iMessage aren't open source, so in theory they could steal your private key as well, or quietly issue a fake one to someone and sit in the middle listening, but in practice, people would notice. Sure, there are small loopholes that could work in particular circumstances, but the odds are remote, and security researchers are already decompiling and tearing apart every version of every messenger program just to see if someone's put a backdoor into it. The short version is, if any of these apps get served with a government warrant right now, the most they could do is say how much two people have been talking and maybe roughly where they were, but never what they were talking about. More than that is literally mathematically impossible. But it's impossible only because of the way they've designed their systems, and that is the vulnerability. A government could make it a legal requirement for Apple and Facebook to quietly add a backdoor in all their encryption if they want to sell anything in their country. I've heard this phrased as outlawing maths, but that's a bit like saying that making punching a stranger in the face illegal is outlawing hands. And if Apple and Facebook refuse to add a backdoor, a government could, well, theoretically, they could ban their phones or ban their apps from sale, or prosecute the people in charge, or block Facebook who own WhatsApp, or they could tell internet providers to block their services, or they could, look, in practice, they're going to fine the company. Apple and Facebook have local addresses, they pay some tax. Sitting on the sidelines, I would love to see the British government go up against Apple and see who blinked first. But companies have bowed to foreign governments loads of times in the past. BlackBerry, like the Indian government, have full access to users' chats and web history back in 2013. The only reason WhatsApp can't read your messages is because they have deliberately chosen to design their systems that way. They were just as popular without encryption. It was an afterthought. They'd been going for years before they switched encryption on. This was a human decision, not an inevitable fact of technology. So, why is an encryption backdoor such a bad idea? Well, if there's a backdoor, it can and will be abused. Local British authorities already used our surveillance laws, the ones that were brought in to stop terrorism, to monitor loud dogs barking, crack down on illegal feeding of pigeons, and to spy on some parents to see if they actually lived near enough to a particular school they want to get their kids into. Now, is this useful for preventing crime? Sure. And there's the argument that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Maybe they shouldn't have illegally fed those pigeons. And yes, you watching this, you probably have nothing to hide, nothing to fear from the current government in your country. But laws and governments change. And besides that, the internet and the apps we use on our phones are global. If you allow a backdoor here, you're also allowing it for another country's government to spy on its opponents, and another to spy on people that they suspect might be gay, or who use marijuana, or who are Christian, or whichever thing is illegal in that country. In 50 years, maybe you'll be part of a country where eating meat has been outlawed, and the government will want to come after you for tracking down the illegal bacon trading ring that your friends are part of. Nothing to hide only works if the folks in power share the values of you and everyone you know entirely and always will. To make it worse, on the surface, this seems like it's equivalent to a regular old-school wiretap, but it's not. Depending on how the backdoor's set up, a government might not just be able to get what someone is sending now. They could get the whole message history, perhaps years of messages back and forth with hundreds or thousands of other people. It's not just a look into what a person is saying. It's an overreaching look into the thoughts of many, many people. It's that long-forgotten naked picture that someone sent 5 years ago. It's that angry essay they wrote in school in which they completely disagree with now. It's not just what are they saying, it's what have they ever said. That's all assuming the backdoor doesn't get abused by folks with more personal grievances. All it takes is one rogue employee in the government or at a messaging app, and we've got a huge amount of personal information being leaked, either of the public at large or of specific people that someone would like to take revenge on. It fails the bitter X test. Can someone with an agenda use this to ruin a life? An AP investigation found hundreds of cases where police officers and civilian staff in the US looked up private information for personal reasons. And let's not start on what would happen if a hacker or some other government's intelligence service got access to the backdoor, or how it would make it much more risky to report abuses of government power on any scale. There is an argument that it would all be worth it, that all those drawbacks would be a small price to pay for stopping very rare bad things. I disagree, but that's an opinion, not a fact. But an encryption backdoor wouldn't stop bad things happening. The problem with stopping terrorism right now is not a lack of information. The Manchester bomber was reported to the authorities 5 times, including by his own friends and family. One anonymous source inside the UK security services told Reuters that at any time there are 500 people being investigated and around 3,000 people of interest. For scale, just to reassure you, that's only about 0.005% of the UK population. But the way to solve this is not more data. It's having enough police officers and security staff with enough time to do their jobs and investigate. And let's be clear, anyone who wanted secure communication for evil purposes would just use something else. Any of thousands of smaller services that the government hasn't noticed yet, or that they couldn't possibly have jurisdiction over. Or if even that is not an option, they can come up with a code themselves, even just in-jokes and references that no one else understands. So when I say that an encryption backdoor sounds like a reasonable idea, I mean it. It sounds reasonable. Like a lot of ideas sound reasonable when you express them in 1 or 2 sentences, but the devil is in the detail. If we could replicate the way wiretaps used to work, limited in scope and time, requiring a warrant and some physical effort, not including the history of everything that someone's ever said, and not open to repressive governments elsewhere in the world, then sure, I would absolutely be in favor of it. Building an encryption backdoor isn't impossible, but building a reasonable one is. Thank you to everyone who helped proofread my script and to everyone here at the Cambridge Centre for Computing History who've let me film with this wonderful old equipment.
Ooh. So, any initial thoughts? Hands up.
I can only agree with him, really. I think it's very dangerous to give a government, just thinking of our present government, I wouldn't like them to know that much about me, really. And I don't have secrets, but despite that, I wouldn't like them to know.
So one of the interesting things is that video is 6 years old. And it came up in the press just last week, which is why I chose it. So it's an ongoing issue or question. Tom?
Yes, a comment really. It may be 6 years old, but it's a lot of what he said is important enough that I shall go back to that tomscott.com and have another look. I thought that was very, very interesting indeed. And very well explained. Thank you for drawing our attention to that, Peter.
Oh, you wait to the second video.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that, well, a couple of things struck me. One is how naive people are, that they don't at least try to find out what the consequences are of what they're doing, right? I mean, would you, if you thought someone could hear your phone conversation, would people say what they probably do on the phone? But the other thing was that one of the early bits of advice, certainly in the private sector, when email and what have you came out and became popular, was don't put anything in an email that you don't want anybody else to read or give to the papers, right? So the advice is always be very careful about what you say using any form of technology, really. It just strikes me that very many people either don't think that or don't think.
Who do you think would decide in the end whether it can be done or not? Governments? Each government?
But I have noticed there's a conversation going on between governments and the big technology players, and people like WhatsApp and Apple and Google are simply saying that if they are forced to add a backdoor, they will withdraw their services from that country.
Well, this is it. They can stop their service altogether.
Well, they can't really, but that is the threat.
I mean that's a. Yeah.
But there is a backdoor with with mobile phone systems. There's a whole legal structure called CALIA, which originated in the US and basically got incorporated into standards. So governments, if they got a warrant, it was a legal process that enabled execution of it, but they could monitor where a device was and also do real-time monitoring of conversations, in effect a wiretap of mobile communications, and that included any of the data activity. The thing that struck me about Tom Scott item was it sounded like that there was an attempt to put an act through Parliament that allowed them to do this without a warrant. So it would be interesting to see if that actually went through.
Well, the Act of Parliament exists now.
It does.
The law is there, but it's not been implemented yet. But of course, it's much more than what you just described. This is mass automated surveillance by, wherever you type in your messaging apps, they'll be looking for keywords, like Pentagon and GCHQ try to do with other mechanisms. But yeah, I'm aware of the telecoms one. They used to call it sneaky beaky when I was working with it. But that, of course, requires a court order per person.
Per subject, yeah.
Yeah. Any more comments? Oh, yes. John.
I work on the assumption that all of this is already happening. I assume that the NSA and the whole Five Eyes group, basically, if they wish to, can tap into anything that's currently around. Whether that includes encrypted operations end-to-end like WhatsApp, I don't know. But the reality is that the clues to whether or not you should be doing something with people's WhatsApp activity comes from their other activity. And I assume that all of their other activity, if they're a person of interest, possibly even if they're not, has the ability to be flagged up in the NSA's systems, and therefore the GCHQ systems. The words you use on your mobile phone can be tracked and triggered. And so if you constantly make references to various things, somewhere in the system, the NSA will pick that up and then flag you as somebody that needs to be identified. And although the volumes have gone up dramatically, I always remember a conversation I had with a colleague in Hong Kong who worked for telecoms there and was connected to the sorts of things that were going on with the American operations in installations in Hong Kong. And I'm going back 30 years, but they had the ability to do an awful lot of that then. And I can only assume that it's dramatically increased since then, exponentially since then. And certainly they have the technical capability to do it. So you might have laws, but even those laws would just effectively get subverted, and people will work around them. And if they're not, then bluntly, the Russians or the Chinese attaching the equivalent of a wiretap to a cable in the sea, which we don't know about, achieves exactly the same thing.
Well, I think
I don't think I'm paranoid.
well, in a past life, I've installed these boxes, they're called SMSCs, that manages short message services, text messages. And whilst testing, you see all the messages people are streaming through in plain text. But the point Tom's making here is that applications such as WhatsApp and Signal specifically do this end-to-end encryption. So it's mathematically impossible for GCHQ or NSA or anyone to intercept those messages currently, which is why the governments around the world are screaming out for a way to get access to them.
But what I'm saying is that even if those things are encrypted in that way, there are enough other sources you can use to identify whether or not what is happening inside those is worthy of some other approach to them. And I guarantee that the security services under the Five Eyes arrangement will have that capability now if they wish to deploy it. And quite often they do. And we know from stuff that comes out that there are rogue operators inside those systems anyway who will do what they want. And GCHQ and NSA aren't capable at the moment of committing enough resources to stop that.
Yeah, so social media springs to mind.
Yeah.
Very quickly, it's actually only suspicion that is required in order for people to decide that they want. You don't actually have to use naughty words in any way. just the thought that you might be thinking of something is enough. So that's the problem we have.
All right. Any other points on this or anything to? Yes.
Yeah, well, I'll throw in a few things here. I mean, it goes back to the old question about who watches the watchers, you know, and there's no easy answer to that. Now, I remember seeing a movie about a Welsh drug dealer, and he was talking to one of his suppliers, whatever, and then what he said to him was, your dog is sick, right? Which would be dog and bone phone. So he kind of knew that the other guy's phone had been tapped, right? So maybe, you know, to you, to sort of ring your friend and say, I think your dog is sick, would be, you know, justify a warrant against you.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing one more thing. I think there was a couple of American computer scientists. They came up with a system. I think it was pretty good encryption, maybe. And this is back in the 80s.
EGP.
Yeah, and the thing was that it was outlawed in the States immediately. Yeah.
Well, it's still available. People still use it. I don't know about being outlawed. It might be outlawed in government institutions or something like that.
Well, I think what happened was that it was made illegal to sell it in the States, so they just moved to Switzerland and made it available from there.
Well, it's free software, so there's no selling involved. Yeah, well, I thought that was quite a interesting video. So unless there's anything else, shall we watch the second one? I quite like these discussions. Right, let's see if I've got share screen. Firefox. Right, I will introduce this one first because it's a little bit confusing video. So what Tom is doing here, he's doing two things at once. He's like pretending to make an advert for this fictional VPN company. You know, you see online all the time adverts for various VPNs and all their features and what they can do for you. And what Tom's doing in this video, he's trying to make such an advert, but at the same time, he's criticizing the words that he's saying in the advert. And at the end of the video, he comes up with what he describes as an honest advert for VPNs, which, at least in his view, describes where and when VPNs are useful. Hopefully that makes sense. Took me a couple of goes to understand what he was saying. So let's go.
But her achievements were never recognized in her lifetime. In 1942, penniless and forgotten, she died of polio. She couldn't protect herself from viruses, but you can protect your computer by using a VPN. Okay, look, I just want to say, I do not want to start drama with people who take sponsorships from VPN companies. With a VPN, all the data you send and receive goes through an encrypted tunnel, so no one can see it. Without a VPN, every time you connect to free Wi-Fi in a hotel or a cafe, you're risking people stealing your passwords, your banking details, and your private data. That's not true. You've probably seen the adverts at the end of every educational channel's videos, and look, it's just that I do this sort of computer security stuff. I am supposed to know about it and to understand it. Like, if I took a sponsorship from a boat manufacturer and then it turned out that the boats sank, that would suck. But I'm not expected to know about boats. I am expected to know about VPNs, virtual private networks, and some of the claims that VPN adverts make are wrong. Password stealing over Wi-Fi was a serious threat a few years ago. Someone could run an ARP spoofing attack, make their computer pretend to be the network hub, and steal every plain text password that went through that Wi-Fi network. It required very little technical knowledge. Or they could compromise the hub itself and look at all the traffic that was going through it. But you know what else sends data through an encrypted tunnel? Every single website with a padlock in the browser, every iPhone app since 2016, every Android app since 2018, anything that sends any sort of personal data now uses a trusted encrypted tunnel, HTTPS, that padlock. And unless you're using websites or apps from the past, if anyone tries to intercept your data, it won't work. Now, people on the network can see what sites you're connecting to, so just the name of your bank, and they could see the contents of dated websites, the ones where the browser now shows not secure. But that's all. No passwords, no bank details. Those attacks don't work anymore. One VPN company even had their advert banned by the UK regulator because of those misleading claims. VPNs use military-grade encryption to keep your data safe. Military-grade encryption means AES, which is the same encryption that's baked into every web browser and app. You're using military-grade encryption to watch this video. The claim's not wrong, it's just not special either. Plus, a VPN stops your internet service provider spying on what you're doing online. Now, that is true to an extent. Yes, without a VPN, your internet service provider, your ISP, can see what domain names you've been connecting to. There can be very good reasons to hide those. Your country may allow ISPs to sell that data to advertisers or to build up a profile on you. Maybe you are studying at a fundamentalist Christian college and you don't want university administrators knowing that you are questioning your faith or questioning your sexuality. Some ISPs also prioritize some apps, sites, and traffic types over others, and a VPN means that they can't do that. Or maybe your government is planning to introduce an ill-advised and often delayed block on adult content, and you want to work around it. That's all reasonable. Metadata does give away a lot of information. Wanting to keep that private is a fair idea. But that's not what a lot of the VPN ads are implying. They're implying that your ISP can read the content of your messages. And again, if there's a padlock in the browser or if you're using a modern app, that's not true. And if you do use a VPN, all you're doing is changing who can see that metadata. Your ISP can't anymore, but the VPN company can, because at their end of the tunnel, they have to look at that metadata to work out where to send your traffic to. But maybe that's worth it for you. And besides, a good VPN doesn't keep any logs on who you're talking to. It is a brave move for a VPN not to keep any logs, given that if it's true, their service will inevitably be used for a lot of really awful illegal stuff. Some do claim that. Some have even brought in independent auditors to try and prove that they don't keep any logs, and you can't have 100% certainty of that, but they have got as close as you reasonably can. So yes, if you are planning an assassination and your priority is absolutely covering your tracks, then sure, I guess a VPN might be worth it. But to customers, a VPN that doesn't keep logs is indistinguishable from one that's been compromised by hackers or that's been given a little government black box that they don't understand but they have to plug into their systems and not tell anyone about. Or from a VPN where a single employee has been bribed and has started logging things for just a few accounts. To be clear, I do not think any of the VPN services are a front for the FBI or Russian mobsters or some state-sponsored, plausibly deniable intelligence operation. Genuinely, they are almost certainly not, and I do not want to scaremonger. Any company that was found to be logging stuff without permission would be bankrupt. Soon after, it would be a very, very bad business decision. And the enormous amount of money that VPN companies suddenly have probably comes from over-enthusiastic venture capital firms. Actually, almost certainly comes from that. But if you wanted to see what the most paranoid, security-conscious people are connecting to, and you wanted to install software on their systems that is designed to read all their network traffic and then redirect it to a single choke point, then setting up a VPN service with a huge advertising budget would be a great way to do it. And if you use a VPN, you can connect to streaming services around the world as if you were in those countries. And that's the real reason a lot of people use VPNs. I go to China or somewhere else that blocks off access to a lot of websites. That's a fair reason. Do you want to watch another country's streaming content or download just enormous amounts of BitTorrents without being tracked? Those are valid uses of VPNs, even if they are legally questionable. It's just that great for pirating stuff and getting around the law is the sort of marketing that gets a company in trouble. And we stop bad people stealing your passwords is the sort of marketing that scares people into buying something that they might not need. So with that in mind, I wrote a more honest advert for VPN services, and I found a company that was willing to sponsor the video. Unfortunately, they kept asking for changes, and we disagreed on those. So at the last minute, I have had to blank their name out. Do you want to hide your sexuality from your college administrators? Do you want to download huge amounts of pirated content with an extremely low, but not zero risk of being found out? Are you planning an assassination and want to hide your tracks? Then you need VPN, the best choice for gay people, pirates, assassins, and gay pirate assassins. VPN is a tool that can be used both for good and evil, and it's extremely unlikely to be a front for the FBI. But you should know, unless you're being personally targeted by well-funded hackers using exploits that the world doesn't know about yet, it doesn't make your passwords and financial data any more safe. they're already pretty safe. And if you are being targeted by hackers like that, you have bigger problems. But if you want to hide your identity, pretend you're in another country, or make sure your connection is secure as you work out the lethal doses of particular chemicals, then go to .com/honest for... That was a lot of money left on the table. A lot of money.
Oh,
Very, very interesting.
yeah, I thought so as well. Before we kick off questions, one thing he didn't say is another use for VPN is to gain access to your company. So if, for example, you're working from home, the company would set up a VPN server on their network internally, and then you'd run a VPN client on your desktop. You start that up, and then you can get access to all the services on the corporate network. And actually, I do that the other way around. I've got a VPN server at home, so when I'm away from home, I can get access to my home network. So that's another valid reason for VPNs, other than spoofing what country you're in. Anyways, any thoughts or comments or additions to that video?
That one was only 3 years old.
Yeah.
I did have a look, did a quick search for encryption on it's only his YouTube site though, and he hasn't done anything more recently about the topic of the first video.
Can you not achieve the same sort of security by using, for instance, a Tor browser?
Yeah, Tor is kind of quite interesting. If it's actually invented by the US government, and the Tor browser works. It's called the Onion Router. That's what Tor stands for. And if you're on your desktop and you want to contact a remote site, the Tor router will bounce you between multiple points in the internet before it gets at the destination. And vice versa. When the response comes back, it goes through multiple layers. And so if someone's trying to trace that traffic, trying to see who's accessing that website by looking at the IP address, it's impossible to trace back because the route through the onion layer changes on each request. But that's dark web stuff. This really is trying to hire your assassins.
Yeah, that's if you really want to be naughty, you use Tor. And you could use a VPN to connect to Tor as well to make it more.
Yeah. So does anyone here actually use a VPN every day?
Well, not anymore, but I used it when I worked for a company part-time. And it was great. It worked really well because I used to work at that company in their offices. And then because I wanted to live somewhere else, they set up a VPN that I could use, and it was fantastic. It worked seamlessly.
Another point about VPNs that I did come across just this morning, actually, was a tip that if your home network is slowing down, turn off the VPN. So that was the advice I read this morning. The implication being is that the VPNs will slow things down. They can't possibly speed things up.
They don't speed it up, but they the chance of it slowing down depends on the connection you make to a particular VPN server, and they go down from time to time. But I have not noticed any serious or even infinitesimal really loss on speeds. It used to be true. I mean, 5-6 years ago it was probably true, but I'm using a decent VPN provider and I never see any loss in terms of bandwidth.
So what's your rationale for using a VPN then?
I just started doing it a long time ago for just privacy reasons, really. And you don't want your internet provider to know where you're going, even relatively innocently. A VPN idea.
Yeah, so Tom's point really is about, if you use a VPN, you have to trust your VPN provider's logs instead of your ISP's logs. That was a good point. Barry.
Hi. I'll now my colours to the mast straight away. I'm almost certainly the least internet savvy of all the people in this Zoom today, and I'm possibly one of the least internet savvy of everybody in North Devon. And listening to that video, much of which I didn't understand, but I get the point he's making. It just makes me wonder just how the general public, the great mass of people out there, the users, the targets of this advertising, can possibly get their heads around what the things that they see bombarded onto their screens and advertised to them. Which of these things actually represent added value that they can use and make cost effectively and will actually benefit them, and which is just window dressing that is simply designed to make money for tech companies? Where's sort of Joe Blogs going to sort of find out what's good and what isn't?
I can answer that question very easily. They attend the U3A community's computing talk.
Good answer, Peter.
With my answer too. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I'm a software engineer. I'm retired now, and I've come across lots of different technologies, and I understand, at least to a degree, lots of things. And I see stuff going on, and thinking, why are they thinking like that? It's a complete misunderstanding of what's going on. So this actually, your question is a really good question, because it's a fundamental reason why I'm here. I personally think it's really important we all understand how these things work so we can make better decisions ourselves. I think that's quite a big issue. But kids these days, they watch YouTube videos like that, and that's the way they get stuff. But it's probably our generation that's missed out on understanding how the technology works under the covers.
Or we created the technology for them to use so blissfully.
I should add, perhaps, as being a lifelong scofflaw, I work on the assumption that they can have me anytime they want. They don't even need to wait for me to unlock the door, because it's always open. On that score, I think we've probably finished our discussion, Peter, if you would nod or stick a thumb up. And thank everyone. This has been recorded. It will be available, of course, in u38communities.org/videos. So hope to see you in October, when Peter will be giving another talk or introducing another person. And I'm closing up now and thanking you very much for attending.
Okay, thank you.
Thank Peter.
Bye.
Cheers.